Well, hello guys. So from the title of this video, I'm basically going to be explaining to you guys how I was able to study for the PTCB exam in 2 weeks and actually pass. I passed with a score of 1560 out of 1600. Hopefully here's where I can insert my score so you guys know I'm not bluffing, that I'm telling the truth. But I don't want this video to be too long because I remember when I was actually studying and researching on my own, there would be like 20-minute videos, 30-minute videos, and you just trying to like get to the straight juice. Like you just trying to know, what do I need to do to pass? Because the last thing you want to do is take this test over. So basically, this book. This book was given to me when I was taking the classes. The classes were paid for by my job. So I didn't have to pull out any money. I actually ended up paying for the test itself, which I'll probably get into at the end of the video when I explain to you guys, after I'm done explaining to you guys how I pass. Because some of y'all might not even care. Like, y'all just trying to figure out how to pass the test. Feel me? So during the classes, they actually had given us handouts. So I have a bunch of handouts here. This one is of the SID codes, BID, TID, PRN, all those SID codes. You have to know your SID codes. There's no way that you're going to take this test and not know what your SID codes are. Because on the test, they only write in SID codes. Some of these I already knew because I've been working as a tech for about 3 years. So I was used to some of these SID codes already. But this handout that my teacher gave me really came in handy. Like, I was sitting on a train on public transportation on my way to work, and I would just memorize what the SID codes are and stuff like that. And then another tip that she gave me was, when it comes to right ear, left ear, each ear, right eye, left eye, D stands for right. D is dominant. So most people, their dominant hand is their right hand. So that's how I'm able to memorize, like, AD is right ear and OD is right eye. So that's a tip that she gave us in class that I was able to memorize and I know. So first thing first is, before the 2 weeks before my test, I really wasn't studying vigorously. Like, I would just glimpse over my notes, but I wasn't taking it too seriously. I took a practice test, and I actually had failed the practice test. I actually didn't know any of the answers to that practice test. So that's when I was like, oh yeah, like, this is not good. So I really just got my shit together and studied really vigorously. That weekend, I memorized the top 200 drugs, brand, generic, and what they do. I memorized all 200. And the way that I was able to memorize it is by using Quizlet. Some of them I'm used to because of where I work, but I'm not used to all 200. Like, there was some drugs that I had never heard of, especially the brand drugs, because you know that most pharmacies dispense generic because that's what's covered by the insurance and it's cheaper. So I barely knew any of the brand drugs. But the one weekend, I found a Quizlet link, and Quizlet is probably the goal. Like, Quizlet is going to be your best friend, because on Quizlet, you can use flashcards, you can use practice tests, you can use games. So I used a combo of all three, and that's how I was able to memorize all 300 in a weekend. So I will probably link below the Quizlet link that I use that had the 200 drugs, because some links, like, some of them had different drugs, not the exact top 200. So I will link the one that I had found that had majority of the words that I needed to know. So with this book, after memorizing the top 200, I went through 2 chapters a day. So I was able to go through this book. I think it has 16 chapters. Let me see. Okay, it has 18 chapters. But I think I had skipped a chapter of other environments. No, I had skipped a chapter, was it? So the chapter that I had skipped was chapter 15. And the reason I skipped chapter 15 is because I'm already pretty informative of what insurance is. And lucky for me, on my test, I didn't have anything that involved insurance. Because chapter 15 is financial management, and it talks more about, like, TRICARE, CHAMPA, basically like government issued insurances, which I was pretty aware of. So that was the only chapter that I skipped. So I did go through chapter 1 to 18, and I skipped chapter 15. And I went through 2 chapters a day. So I was able to be finished in about, I want to say I was done in like 11 days going through the book. And the way that I studied for the book is I really went real thorough with the book. So when I would get off of work, because I was still working during this 2-week period, but I did take off like 4 days before my test. And those 4 days I was MIA, like I wasn't talking to nobody. But anyway, back to how I studied the book. Basically, I'll have my laptop next to me, and anything that I didn't understand the definition, I didn't know what it was, and the book didn't explain it in a way where I could understand, I would go on the internet and find a way to understand it. And I feel like that's how I was able to actually understand what it was trying to say to me. So I recommend that to you. Don't just read through the book. Have your computer next to you. And also something that really helped me was having study music playing. And I'll link also below what study music I had playing in the background. And when I say study music, I'm not talking about like Mozart or Beethoven. It's actually like really calm beats that put you in a more focused mood as you're reading what you're going through. So that's how I was able to go through the book. So I went through this whole entire book in about 9 days. Then, so the Quizlet, going through the book vigorously. Anything you don't know, search up on the internet. Make sure you absorb the information and you're able to understand it. Also, in class, they had also gave us these PowerPoints. My teacher had actually summarized some chapters into PowerPoint for us. And this came in handy because let's say I was on the bus or on the train, I would be able to just go through these really easy. Like you see for some of this, like for this, I had written something to memorize. This was, yeah. I'm going to see if I can, okay. These two, Chapter 797 and Chapter 795, you have to know. And the way that I was able to actually remember was that I associated 7 with thorough. So that's how I was able to know that Chapter 97 dealt with thorough. I think it's the SS. Like I caught on to that pretty quickly. SS, thorough 7, Chapter 97 stands for thorough. Chapter 95. Chapter 795 stands for non-thorough. You have to know that also. Like there's no getting around for that. They had asked me a question about that on my test. But yeah, and also, so I basically used the combination of the textbook, the PowerPoints. Granted, I know some of you guys don't even have these PowerPoints, so that's why I would say have the computer next to you, because if anything, you go on a computer and it'll give you like a better definition of stuff. And I also did that when it came to trying to remember how to pronounce the brand and generic drugs. Granted, they're not going to ask you about punctuation on the test, but these words could look real funny sometimes, and you just want to know how it's pronounced. I mean, you don't have to, but it is what it is. Another thing that I did was that I downloaded 2 apps. I downloaded 2 apps from the PTCB certification board. There's one for calculations, and there's one for pocket prep. Those 2 apps, I really believe those 2 apps are the apps that made me actually pass the test. Because what I would do is that for 2 weeks, I will go through 20 questions on each app. So the calculations and the pocket prep. The pocket prep will ask you more questions more about like federal law or brand and generic, stuff like that. While the calculation is strictly calculations. And it'll give you calculations from flow rate, hospital pharmacy calculations, insulins, eye drops. Like it gives you all types of calculations. So I went through 20 questions on each app, and then closer to when I was taking the test, I would go up to 90 questions a day because the test consisted of 90 questions. So I would do up to 90 questions on each app. 4 days before the test, the way that I studied is day 1, I went over the brand and generic one more time. And I'm actually going to see if I can find the outline for the test. So I found the outline, and I'm going to be looking down because I'm looking down on my computer. But it's 40% medications, 12.5% federal requirements, 26.25% patient safety and quality assurance, and order entry and processing. What was funny for me, when I would take the practice test, where I was failing a lot was patient safety and quality assurance. It would be more like the high alert drugs, medications I wouldn't know, along with like MedWatch, leading and trialing zeros, like stuff like that is what I was really messing up on. Stuff that I wasn't used to dealing with in the pharmacy that I was working in. So when you download those 2 apps, it tells you where you're lacking after you take the practice test or after you do practice questions. Like, it tells you where you're lacking. So wherever you're lacking would be where I was focused on. So that's what I was doing for the 4 days before the test. My test was on Wednesday. I took on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And so I was basically doing practice questions all over again. And whenever I did the practice questions, and wherever I would fail, or wherever the app would tell me I need to work on, would be where I would go back and work on. Along with just brushing up on other information, just to make sure I knew what I needed to know. Along with order entry. Order entry was very difficult for me also. But shit, I did it. So those are the tips that I really have. I really recommend the apps because I feel like if it wasn't for the apps, I probably could have failed, because even when I took the test, the questions on the test were worded similar to how the questions on the app were. Especially because, like, the app, the questions are formulated from people who make the test up, basically. Like, they're the same company. So that's why I would say definitely get the apps. It's like, I think it's like a $14 or $15 one-time charge, and I think it's totally worth it. You always have to spend money to get to where you want to be. You know what I mean? Unless you're like really smart and don't got to do that. But hey, shout out to you if you are. So those are the tips that I have on really studying really intensely and what I did for the 2 weeks to pass my test. It's very capable to pass this test. Like, this test is hard, but it can be very doable if you do what you have to do. If I had went in the way I was the 2 weeks before, like before the 2 weeks when I studied really aggressively, I would have failed. So that's what I'm saying. Like, really do what you have to do. Really make it happen, and it is doable. When you get off of work, study. When you wake up in the morning, study. Before you go to work, study. Your days off, study. You can ask any of my friends. Like, they didn't hear from me. I wasn't speaking much because I just really wanted to just do what I had to do. I wasn't talking on the phone as much. I wasn't doing anything. I was just studying really intensely, and that's what I can really recommend. As long as you have the textbook and the 2 apps, it's very capable. The Quizlet, I wouldn't recommend everything off of Quizlet, because what I will do sometimes is that whatever was in the book didn't really correspond what was on Quizlet. So that's why I only use Quizlet for the top 200 brand and generic drugs. Know your acts, know your drugs, know your SIG codes, know your calculations, know your federal law, know your federal law, and I think you have it in the bag. I can't stress enough the apps, because I feel like the apps really tell you where you're lacking, what you have to work on, and when you take the practice test, you're able to see like where you really need to work on and be like, oh shit, like I really have to get it together. So that's it for the video. If you guys pass, please let me know in the bottom section in the comments. Let's talk about this. But yeah.